Welcome. My name is Chris Godine, and I'm a Senior Product Manager at Zoom. In today's session, we're going to talk about building immersive meeting experiences using the Zoom Apps Layers API. Besides myself, you'll hear from Robert Wallace, Engineering Manager at Zoom, who will walk you through the process step by step of building a Layers app. You'll also hear from Attila Vago, Lead Engineer at Prezi, who will share his experience building Prezi's newest Zoom app using the Layers API. In this session, you'll learn best practices, tips, tricks, and everything you need to know to build your own Layers app. By the end, you'll have the tools and knowledge you need to build immersive meeting experiences in Zoom that will help businesses all over the world increase their meeting engagement. Before we get started, just a couple housekeeping items. This session is 30 minutes, and at the end, we'll do an interactive Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout this presentation, make sure you drop them in the chat and we'll answer them live at the end of the session. The session will also be recorded and the recording will be available after the event. Okay, let's jump right in. As you know, the pandemic followed by the subsequent shift to the hybrid work model has increased our dependence on virtual meetings. Online meetings, which were once novel experiences, have now become the new normal. But this increase in volume has pushed the limits of our attention span. Even your favorite food becomes less exciting if you eat it every single meal each and every day. The problem is virtual meetings are all the same. You're either watching someone's camera or watching someone's screen. Over time, it's no surprise that businesses start to see poor meeting engagement with their virtual meetings. We're all familiar with the telltale signs of poor meeting engagement. Most participants are on mute or they have their cameras turned off. And when called upon, participants often seem distracted or confused. This is a big problem. Poor meeting engagement can lead to severe business consequences, including lost productivity, high attrition, less collaboration, and poor employee output. It ultimately impacts the business's bottom line. At Zoom, we're aware of this problem and we're actively working on solutions, but we can't do it alone. We need help from you, our developer community, to help make meetings more engaging. What if, instead of serving the same experience each and every meeting, hosts had a whole menu of engaging experiences to choose from? Introducing the Zoom Apps Layers API. The Zoom Apps Layers API will allow you to build immersive meeting experiences in Zoom that will help hosts capture and keep participant attention. This new and exciting API will allow you to mix web apps with video streams to add additional dimension and character to virtual meetings, and ultimately increasing meeting engagement. For example, this Layers app overlays a presentation on top of the host's video stream. In this experience, participants don't have to stare at boring slides. Instead, they can focus their attention on the presenter while still being able to see the reference material. Another example is this Layers app, which overlays the video streams of all participants in the meeting on top of a web app, which is a poker game in this case. This fun and immersive experience makes people feel like they're actually in the game. I doubt you'll find cameras off in this meeting. The Zoom Apps Layers API unlocks a whole new world of possibilities. And to help you get started with it, we'll now pass it over to Robert, who will share his process for building a Layers app. Over to you, Robert.
Let's get started with the Layers API. The Layers API has basically two modes. There's immersive or team mode, and there's camera mode. What's the difference between those? Well, let me share my screen. I have my app here, and I'm just going to go ahead and start immersive mode. Now, when I start immersive mode, what I'm doing is I'm creating this web view that's in the middle of the area where you normally see the grid or the speaker view. And I can change anything I want in here because it's just HTML. And it's totally interactive. I've got all these different buttons and controls that I can use. And what I can do is I can draw people's videos anywhere on the page. So I can do this, or I can change the size of the video to whatever I want. So you can lay out the screen however you want it to be laid out. That's really cool. One interesting thing about the immersive mode is that immersive mode is local to the user. So if this was a poker game, I would see my cards, but other people wouldn't see my cards. Everybody has their own web view on their own computer that has their own content on it. Now, the other mode is camera mode. Camera mode allows me to put web content right here inside of the camera. Why would you want to do this? Well, you don't have to create a virtual camera. You don't have to install a binary on your users' computers. They already have Zoom, and it's easy to use because you can choose to use normal web technologies like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and you can put things inside the user's camera. Then that camera feed goes out to all users of Zoom, no matter what version that they're using. They could be on mobile, they could be on a thin client. They don't even have to be running your app, and they'll still see the content here inside of the video feed. So I think that camera mode is pretty exciting. What do you need to do to get camera mode working? Well, let's go ahead and look at the build flow. Now, the build flow is at marketplace.zoom.us. And here in the Zoom Apps SDK area, you can add events and APIs that you're going to need. So we'll go through some of the ones that I have enabled for my app. We have get running context. Now, this will tell us whether you are in camera mode or whether you're in the sidebar app, or whether you're in the main client and you're not even in a meeting. Then get user context is going to be used so that way we can get the user ID of yourself. So that way when we call draw participant, you can draw your own camera inside of your camera mode. Then post message and the event called on message. We got post message and on message. They will be used to talk between the sidebar app and the camera mode app. Camera mode apps don't allow interactivity. You can't click on any buttons that were rendered in the camera mode app. So you'll need to have the sidebar app open to control what's inside of the camera mode app. And so the way that we send messages between the sidebar app and the camera mode app is by using post message and on message. Then run rendering context. This is the main function that will create this secondary web view beside the sidebar web view. And run rendering context view immersive creates the one that is in the middle of the screen, like where you would normally see the grid view. And run rendering context view camera is the one that will create the camera mode web view. Now we're going to need draw participant in order to see the video stream on top of the web view. And then because the video stream is not actually part of the DOM, there are certain circumstances where you want to render something on top of the camera even. And that wouldn't be possible since the video stream isn't part of the DOM. So we have this thing called draw image that allows you to put more content on top of the video streams. Then we have draw web view, which will tell camera mode where, like what z-index layer to draw that web view at. And finally, there is an event that we're not going to actually be using, but you might want to use, on rendered app opened, which will tell the sidebar app that your camera mode app has just been opened. Now, what happens when you open up camera mode is that it will try to download CEF if CEF hasn't been downloaded already. So the very first time that a user uses your camera mode app, they're going to see this dialog box. If they've already used Prezi or they've already used Warmly, they've probably already downloaded camera mode and they're not going to have to download it for your app. But the very first time someone uses camera mode, then they will need to download CEF. And that's basically what this dialog is doing. Then once CEF is downloaded, it will load the same URL of your app. But how do you differentiate what is in camera mode with what's over here in the sidebar? Well, the way you do that is you get running context to figure out if you're in meeting or if you're in camera mode. And so then you can use your router to route your content to a different part. Now let's go and see, let's look at this actual code where it says camera mode is cool. I'm using Vue.js just because I like it, but you could use anything that you want. You could use React, you could use Vanilla.js. It doesn't matter. I'm just using Vue.js because it was easy for me to create this demo. Now let's go ahead and change this to Zoomtopia 2022. And this is just a normal H1. And we come down here and we look at our CSS. We've got color is white text, and we've got this text shadow with a 30% alpha channel on the black scrim. We'll go over here and we'll close the rendering context and open it up again in order to refresh what is going to be drawn in here. And now you can see Zoomtopia 2022. Now, this isn't actually that impressive because you could use set virtual foreground, and you could put static text somewhere on the screen. So why would you want to use camera mode? Well, camera mode, I think, is really cool because you can have dynamic content. You can have animations. So in my app, I have an animation when you post a message with a field called message in it, then all of the text in there is going to show up in a div, and that div is going to animate on the screen. So let's go ahead and make a rocket ship. And we'll say, welcome to camera mode. And I'm going to go ahead and send that to my app, and you'll see it animate. Isn't that cool? It just smoothly animated onto the screen. That's just not possible with set virtual foreground. And then when I clear it, it'll smoothly animate away. How did I do that? Well, I used normal HTML and CSS. I have these classes. I have a lower third class, and I have the transition set to 1 second with an ease in out animation style, and it's going to work on all of these properties. Then when there's a hide class and a lower third class, the bottom will be set to -50%, so it'll be off the screen. And I'll set the background color of the scrim to 0%. But when the hide is gone, then the bottom will be 0, so it'll show up on the bottom of the screen. And the scrim color will be this dark gray alpha because it's basically black with a 30% alpha. And we'll go ahead and type test in here, and we'll just show that. See, you can see the scrim just right there. And this is just normal HTML and CSS. This is stuff that you already know how to do. And you don't have to learn how to make a virtual camera. You don't have to install the executable on someone's computer. You can just use normal web technologies. They already have Zoom installed, and now they can use your app to make really cool stuff. So what kind of ideas could you use this for? Well, maybe you could use it to make live performance charts, or maybe you could do highlighting somebody in a stand-up, like who has the floor, who's already spoken. I just can't wait to see what you're going to build with Camera App. Now let's go back to Chris and Attila, and we'll see how Prezi is already using camera mode to make their app.
Thanks, Robert. So we now have Attila Vago, who's a lead engineer at Prezi. And Attila will share his experience building Prezi Zoom app using the Layers API. So Attila, before we actually jump into your Layers app and your experience building it, can you help me understand a little bit more about Prezi, especially for those who haven't heard of your company?
Sure, yeah. Hi, Chris. Of course. Well, Prezi creates professional-looking experiences in Zoom that invite participation and promote collaboration in your hybrid meetings. Prezi Video specifically lets you stay on screen with your content as you present in Zoom. So this gives you a face-to-face human connection you can't get with traditional screen sharing.
That's excellent. Yes, I love Prezi. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about what you build. As I understand, Prezi has a new app that leverages the Layers API. So yeah, can you tell us more about this new, what you built and how you leverage the Layers API?
Sure. There's a lot to unpack there. So we are building a very exciting video presentation application. As leaders of better presentations over Zoom, we wanted to bring our customers a straightforward, intuitive user experience. From text to images and other assets, we imagine it all in the video feed right next to the user. We believe we can elevate meetings of any size to a new level with a lot less effort than ever before. And this is where the Layers API is transformative for us. With previous iterations, we were heavily reliant on using a virtual camera that required spinning up a native application on the side. Not only was that considerable development cost for us, it was also a huge friction point for users. The Layers API removes the need for the virtual camera and thus the need for the native application. We're essentially reverting back to tried and tested web technologies like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The fact that we can now layer an entire browser on top of the video feed is game-changing. Besides the reduced development cost, which of course results in increased team velocity, the skills and resources to build any feature we want are much more widely available. I must admit the team and I have never been more enthusiastic about the possibilities the Layers API gives us as a team and Prezi in general.
That's amazing to hear. Thank you for saying that, and what a great experience. I'd love to hear. So I mean, in this presentation, we're targeting developers, and so if you were to talk to developers right now, what are tips and tricks that you would offer them for working with the Layers API?
Well, where do I start, Chris? Okay, well, first of all, read the API documentation seriously, maybe more than once. The latest version of the API is very capable, and hence getting a good understanding of all it can provide for your next step is absolutely crucial. Before we started building our application, I created a proof of concept that we went through all the major API endpoints and events I knew we might need later. So the learnings were invaluable and provided a strong foundation for the app we're about to submit to the Zoom marketplace. Another important aspect to get a good handle on is the event-based messaging system. It's the backbone for any kind of Zoom application that wants to communicate between the meeting and the camera context. And speaking of which, this is another one that many might initially struggle wrapping their heads around. As a developer, you're only building one app. That app then runs into different contexts, meeting and camera. What shows where is based on querying from the API what context the app is in. It's very clever. It reminds me a little bit of the Chrome extension architecture. Another one to watch out for is clear web view. You might assume that it will remove the web view from the camera context and reset it. What actually happens, however, is that the web view from the camera context gets hidden. If you want to entirely scrap that view, you'll need to call close rendering context. One final advice I would like to kind of give is make sure all relevant events and APIs are added in the Zoom app marketplace settings. I, for one, had plenty of facepalm moments when realizing I was trying to use an API endpoint or event that I never added in the settings. In development mode, seriously, save yourself the trouble, just add everything up front. When in doubt, add all the things.
I appreciate you saying that, and I'm sure many developers will appreciate it as well to save them a few headaches. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, throughout the process, you probably faced a couple challenges along the way. Um, can you tell me a little bit more about some of your biggest challenges? What were they, and what did you do to overcome them?
Sure. As we know, there is no software development without challenges. The biggest challenge for me was understanding how the two contexts work in conjunction with the event-based messaging system. But not because it's complex or anything, but rather because I didn't spend enough time reading the documentation from top to bottom. I always get very excited about building things. I'm an engineer at heart and assume half the things I didn't read I already know. Big mistake, seriously. Spend a couple of hours reading the API docs, looking at example projects on Zoom's GitHub might also be useful. Once I did that, it was pretty much smooth sailing. Another one, I suppose a bit of a head scratcher is mirroring. While the API allows us to trigger the setting programmatically, there is still a distinction to be made between the presenter seeing themselves and participants seeing the video feed of the presenter. The good news is that I'm sure between the Prezi team and Zoom's engineers, we'll figure out a solution. And I have to tell you, it really helps knowing we're partners in building a successful product.
Yes, we are absolutely partners. At Zoom, we care about our developer community and are certainly here to help along the way. So yeah, so digging more into that, I mean, you obviously went through this experience of building a Layers app yourself, and you probably, if you could do it all over again, you probably would follow a certain process. So from your experience, could you summarize what that process is? Like, what steps would you take end to end to build a Layers app?
Sure, Chris. Strictly from a development perspective, I would suggest breaking things down to a few distinct steps, of course. First of all, get familiar with the API, read the documentation. At this stage, it's also worth signing up for the Zoom Developer Forum. There are some very enlightening, entertaining conversations going on there. And really, life is just too short to learn only from your own mistakes. So reading up on what other developers struggled with and solved in the past is frankly invaluable. Then, of course, create an app in the Zoom Marketplace. And for local development, just make sure you have something like ngrok installed on your machine. Then, build a proof of concept. This is the stage that will truly crystallize the capabilities of the API and give you the confidence to then have those feature-related conversations with your product owner. We specifically built the app in React. So perhaps the quickest way to achieve success is fire up a create React app application, eject it, set your OWASP headers, security headers. This is very important. And then render that also exciting hello world to start with. Up to this point, you don't even really need to use the API, but once you pass the hello world, I would install the latest API and make sure my Zoom client is up to date. An out-of-date client can actually render some impossible to debug errors, and it can lead to unnecessary frustration, which you kind of want to avoid. Without getting into the nitty-gritty details, at this point, there are two crucial things you want to set up: the user context and your rendering context, meeting and camera. Once you have these, you're pretty much in feature development mode, and your team and product owner's imagination is really the limit. And now, of course, I do have to mention deployment as well. As long as it's a publicly available URL, you're grand. You need to host your web app somewhere and provide authorization, and that's really it.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for outlining step to step. I think that's really valuable for our developer community. So can you tell me a little bit more about, just now that you've worked with the Layers API, what are some other use cases or things that come to mind for how you would use the Layers API?
Yeah, I do see a couple of creative uses for the Layers API. And the first one that comes to mind is actually hackathons. I think that is how many of Prezi's engineers got excited about it too. The excitement then got contagious, and finally the entire company started seeing a real potential in it. With the Layers API, we were able to showcase many of our ideas internally within just a day or two. And that's quite powerful. It's also a great introduction to web app development in a different, I would even say, more exotic context compared to traditional web app development. Which kind of brings me to another one, like education could also be another use. It's a fairly easy to consume API, even for someone with limited web development experience. I wouldn't be surprised if courses would pop up soon on how to build Zoom apps in a single afternoon.
That would be amazing. I would love to see a course like that. Yeah, so I mean, you mentioned web development there, traditional web development, and then of course, we're talking about Zoom app development, and there's some similarities between the two, of course. But what would you say is like the benefit of Zoom app development compared to traditional web development?
Well, without a shadow of a doubt, it has to be the audience. I'll illustrate through something seemingly unrelated. I've been blogging for 18 years, but only once I moved to Medium did I start having an actual audience. That brought inevitable success because the audience was built into the platform. Building a Layers API app on a platform like Zoom comes exactly the same way with millions of built-in potential customers. And if that's not attractive to any developer with an entrepreneurial bone, I don't know what is.
Me neither. Yes, I mean it's a huge community to tap into. It's a relatively new space, so yes, I mean if you are an entrepreneur as well as a developer, there's definitely opportunity here. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about the future and for Prezi, like specifically, how are you planning to use the Layers API in the future?
Well, look, Chris, the Layers API, as I alluded to before, allows us, Prezi, to do what we do best. For instance, with the new app, we didn't have to worry about background blurring affecting the presentations as well. The solution came out of the box with the API. Given the fact that, as mentioned earlier, we have an entire browser we can layer on top of the video output, the sky is the limit. We're looking at where Zoom users need improvement with their daily meetings and presentations and keep serving them. Now we can really do that and do it quickly. And this is key for a strong partnership between Prezi and Zoom.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Attila. This has been a very engaging discussion. I think you've offered the community some great insights and tips based on hard-earned experience. So thank you so much for sharing this. We really appreciate it. So I want to summarize what we talked about. So I think one of the key lessons that we learned is that you don't need to build your own virtual camera app to build immersive experiences within Zoom. You can actually leverage the Zoom Apps Layers API to build, to mix web video streams with web apps using technologies that you're already familiar with, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. With the Layers API, you can solve real-world problems by helping businesses boost meeting engagement. And you can get started with the Zoom Apps Layers API today. You can start developing. I encourage everyone to check out our documentation at marketplace.zoom.us/docs/zoomapps. If you need any help along the way, if you have any questions for your development, also please reach out to us. We're happy to support you on our developer forums. That's at devforum.zoom.us. We are so excited to see what you build with the Zoom Apps Layers API, and we can't wait to see it. So we'll now move to the interactive Q&A session. If you haven't asked your questions in the chat throughout this presentation, please go ahead and do so now, and we'll answer them live. So thank you all for tuning in. Can't wait again to see what you build.
Well, here we are, my friends. It is the end. All good things must end. We must say goodbye now. But what an incredible trip it has been, and informative. I learned a lot. I learned humpback whales are happy. I learned that you can whiteboard. I learned that the Zoom room is going to have cameras eventually that have artificial intelligence. So no funny stuff in the Zoom room, folks. What else have I learned? I've learned that when you perform live in front of people in a convention center, it's better to actually wear pants. Just throwing it out there. Hopefully, Zoomtopia has enabled you to grow, change. I hope it is going to bring you much success in all of your companies. That's what this is all about, isn't it? Success. This is the key to success, love and happiness. I want to thank Zoom for having me, and thank you all for joining online.